I was struggling with boxes, and then he appeared. What happened next changed everything. It was one of those quiet Saturday mornings when the world feels both still and full of hidden motion. She had been wrestling with the task of moving boxes into her small, sunlit apartment, and the moment seemed almost cinematic. The soft hum of the city outside, the gentle rustle of paper as boxes shifted, and sunlight spilling across the wooden floor. Each box she lifted seemed heavier than the last, her fingers brushing against the rough tape and slightly worn cardboard. Despite her graceful movements, there was a subtle tension in her shoulders, a quiet sigh that betrayed the effort behind the smile she wore for herself. He noticed her from across the street, standing frozen for just a moment as he debated whether he should intervene. There was something about the way she moved, calm, confident, but quietly vulnerable, that drew his gaze. She laughed softly to herself as a particularly stubborn box resisted her. A sound light and musical, and for some reason, it made him pause in the middle of his own errand. He was 25, usually confident in his ability to strike up conversation. But here, in this ordinary scene, he hesitated. There was a hesitance born not from fear but from a delicate respect, a sense that this was a moment he shouldn't rush. Finally, he stepped forward, clearing his throat gently, offering a small, friendly smile. "Need some help with that?" His voice was careful, not overbearing, carrying just the right amount of warmth. She looked up, initially startled, her eyes a deep, thoughtful brown that seemed to study him as much as he studied her. Then, after a brief, almost imperceptible pause, she nodded. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone would notice," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and amusement. The first touch was accidental, yet unforgettable, her fingers brushing his as she handed over the box. It was brief, a simple transfer of weight, but in that moment, both felt a tiny spark of connection. He noticed the subtle warmth of her hand, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the fresh air, and the softness of her skin against the rough edges of the cardboard. She laughed lightly when the box wobbled, and he instinctively steadied it, their hands meeting again just for a second, lingering longer than necessary. He found himself observing more than just the task. The way sunlight caught the gentle waves of her hair, the curve of her smile, the quiet dignity in her posture even while struggling. She, in turn, seemed intrigued by his attentiveness, the care in how he handled the boxes, the quiet patience that made her feel unexpectedly seen. It was a small, ordinary encounter on a quiet morning, but in that brief interlude, a subtle tension had formed. Neither of them had spoken of attraction or desire, yet the moment was charged with potential, like a delicate thread stretched between them, waiting for the next gentle tug. And just like that, the story began. Not with a grand gesture or a dramatic meeting, but with a shared struggle, a fleeting touch, and two people noticing each other in a way that would linger long after the boxes were put away. The second box was heavier than the first, and as they lifted it together, their shoulders brushed in a way that made both of them acutely aware of the space they were sharing. He noticed the quiet strength in her arms, the steady rhythm of her movements, and the ease with which she balanced both physical effort and an understated elegance. She, in turn, observed him more closely now, how he hesitated just enough to be cautious, how his hands adjusted instinctively to support the weight, and how his eyes lingered not just on the task, but on her with a gentle curiosity. Conversation began awkwardly at first. He commented on the surprisingly heavy load. She teased him about his careful approach, and laughter punctuated the brief silence that followed. There was comfort in the simplicity of it. Two strangers connected by circumstance, sharing a physical effort that demanded coordination and attention. But beneath the surface, an unspoken tension grew. The awareness of each other's presence, the subtle brush of hands, the accidental closeness as they maneuvered around the narrow hallway. As they worked, he noticed small details that made her feel real and alive in a way beyond physical attraction. The framed photographs stacked on a nearby shelf hinted at her life. Trips taken, friends and family, moments she valued. A half-open book revealed her interest in art, and a small potted plant on the windowsill added a delicate touch to the otherwise practical space. These small glimpses of her personality fascinated him, making the act of helping with boxes feel less like a chore and more like a shared exploration of who she was. She found herself relaxing more in his presence. His quiet attentiveness and polite patience were rare, almost comforting. She appreciated how he didn't rush her, didn't make assumptions, and somehow made the task feel lighter just by being there. Their hands touched again briefly as they adjusted a particularly stubborn box, and this time, the contact lingered a heartbeat longer than before. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of surprise and subtle delight that she hadn't expected from a simple act of help. The sunlight streaming through the window highlighted the subtle contours of her face, the soft waves of her hair, and the gentle curve of her shoulders. He couldn't help but notice, but he kept his observations quiet, letting them sit in the space between them. She sensed the attention, the way he seemed to register every small detail without comment, and it made her smile softly, a small, private acknowledgement that he had noticed. By the time the last box of this round was in place, a rhythm had formed between them. Words were less necessary now. Their cooperation, the shared laughter, the accidental touches, and the quiet glances spoke volumes. The room felt warmer, not just from the physical effort, but from the presence of each other. A slow, unfolding connection that neither of them wanted to rush but both felt keenly. In this shared effort, they weren't just moving boxes. They were discovering a delicate harmony, a subtle dance of mutual respect, gentle curiosity, and the beginnings of something unspoken yet undeniable. The story was no longer just about moving things. It was about noticing each other in ways that mattered, building a quiet, steady bridge toward something more. After the heavier boxes were finally maneuvered into place, they both sank onto the narrow staircase leading to her apartment. He leaned back against the wall, catching his breath, while she perched on the step above him, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. For a few moments, neither spoke. The only sounds were the faint hum of the city outside and the quiet settling of boxes in the room. In that stillness, a different kind of connection began to take shape. She laughed softly, a warm, unguarded sound that carried a hint of exhaustion. "I didn't realize how many things I had," she admitted, a mixture of frustration and amusement in her tone. He smiled, noticing the small vulnerability in her voice, the glimpse of someone who was usually so composed now momentarily unguarded. "It's okay," he said gently. "I've seen worse. Besides, you're handling it better than most people would." Their conversation shifted from the practical to the personal. She spoke of her career with quiet pride, revealing the dedication behind her calm demeanor. He listened intently, offering sincere observations and asking thoughtful questions. In turn, he shared small pieces of his own life, his studies, ambitions, and moments of doubt, allowing her a window into his world. Their exchange was easy, yet charged with subtle awareness. Every pause and glance carried weight, every shared smile a quiet acknowledgement of connection. As they talked, small, seemingly accidental touches continued to punctuate the moment. Her hand brushed against his as she shifted her weight on the step, his fingers lingering briefly near hers without intent. He felt the warmth of her presence beside him, the softness of her sweater against his arm, the faint perfume that lingered in the air between them. Each touch, though minor, was magnetic, a silent language of familiarity, curiosity, and quiet attraction. The sunlight streaming through the window softened, casting a golden glow across the staircase. Shadows danced lightly on the floor, highlighting the gentle curve of her jaw, the soft fall of her hair, and the subtle intensity in her eyes when she looked at him. He found himself observing the way she tilted her head thoughtfully, how her lips curved in a contemplative smile, and the way she seemed completely present, yet slightly unaware of the impact she had on him. There was a moment of pause, almost imperceptible, when their hands rested close together on the step between them. Neither moved, neither spoke, yet both felt the electricity of proximity, the quiet thrill of being noticed and understood. The tension wasn't urgent or desperate. It was patient, slow building, the kind that makes a room feel simultaneously intimate and expansive. By the time they finally rose to tackle the next box, a subtle shift had occurred. The physical task remained, but beneath it, something deeper had formed. Trust, mutual admiration, and the fragile beginnings of romantic curiosity. In those quiet, in-between moments, they weren't just moving boxes. They were moving closer to each other, learning to navigate the unspoken spaces of human connection, and discovering that sometimes the smallest gestures, a smile, a brush of fingers, a shared laugh, carry the most profound weight. The next box was the heaviest yet, awkwardly shaped and teetering in the narrow hallway. He instinctively reached for it, but she put a gentle hand on his arm, shaking her head slightly. "I've got this," she said softly, a calm determination in her tone that contrasted with the brief furrow in her brow. He hesitated, caught between wanting to help and respecting her independence. The moment stretched, fragile and weighty, as both silently considered their next move. He noticed the small tension in her shoulders, the careful way she shifted her weight to steady the box. There was pride in her effort, a quiet insistence that she could manage alone, but he also sensed a flicker of strain behind her composed expression. His hands hovered near the box, unsure whether to intervene, uncertain how much to assert himself without overstepping. For the first time, he felt the weight of more than cardboard in his hands. He felt the weight of social perception, propriety, and the delicate balance between kindness and intrusion. She, too, was aware of the tension. She appreciated his instinct to help, but part of her hesitated because accepting aid could feel like admitting vulnerability, a rare admission for someone used to handling life with quiet confidence. Yet in that same hesitation, she felt an odd comfort, a recognition that someone genuinely wanted to support her without judgment, that someone had noticed her struggle and was willing to meet it with care. Their hands brushed again as he adjusted his grip, and this time the contact lingered a fraction longer. It was electric, but subtle, enough to make their skin tingle, enough to draw their attention to the shared proximity, without needing words. He caught a faint whiff of her perfume, soft and floral, mixed with the faint musk of exertion, and for a moment, the room seemed charged with possibility. She, meanwhile, felt the warmth of his presence behind her and the careful steadiness of his hands as they hovered nearby, and she realized how oddly reassuring it was. A small, awkward laugh broke the silence. "You're staring," she said teasingly, though her eyes betrayed amusement rather than reproach. He smiled, embarrassed, and shook his head. "I'm just noticing how strong you are," he admitted, the words sounding more sincere and vulnerable than he expected. For a brief instant, the weight of the box, the closeness, and the unspoken connection between them seemed to blur, and neither knew how much of the tension was physical, how much emotional. The moment passed, and they resumed the task, moving the box with careful coordination. Their shoulders brushed repeatedly, accidental yet intimate, a rhythm forming that was both practical and charged with a subtle awareness of each other. The hesitation had not been a barrier but a bridge. It allowed them to pause, to recognize the boundaries, and yet feel the magnetic pull of shared effort and quiet attention. By the time the box was finally set down, there was a lingering awareness in the room. The tension between propriety and desire, respect and curiosity, independence and connection. In that delicate pause, they had communicated more than words could capture. An unspoken acknowledgement that some moments, like this one, were charged with meaning long after the task finally. The last box found its place, stacked neatly against the wall of her apartment. The room, once cluttered and chaotic, now felt spacious, warm, and alive with the quiet satisfaction of a task completed. She stepped back, letting out a soft sigh that carried both relief and a surprising undercurrent of pride. "I can't believe we actually did it," she murmured, a smile tugging at her lips. He leaned against the doorway, brushing sweat from his forehead, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The physical effort had been taxing, yes, but the emotional payoff, the shared laughter, the silent coordination, the subtle touches, made it feel effortless in a way. Their eyes met, and for the first time since they had started, there was a quiet stillness between them, a pause that wasn't about moving boxes but about acknowledging something more. She turned toward him, her smile softening, warmth radiating from her eyes. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said, her voice genuine. touched with vulnerability. She stepped closer, and he noticed the subtle sway of her hair catching the light from the window. He offered a small shrug, casual but sincere. "Honestly, I just wanted to help. You made it easy," he admitted, though even as he spoke, he felt the truth in his words. It wasn't the boxes or the physical effort that mattered, but the way they had connected, moment by moment. Then, almost instinctively, she reached out. Not for another box, not for help, but for a gesture of appreciation. A brief, warm touch on his forearm. The contact was fleeting yet electric. He felt the softness of her hand, the subtle warmth that lingered like sunlight on his skin. She smiled, as if surprised by the comfort of the touch herself, and he returned it with a gentle nod, letting the moment hang, delicate and unspoken. The room seemed quieter now, but charged with the intimacy of shared effort. Every detail became magnified, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air, the way the sunlight highlighted the gentle curve of her jaw, the small, unintentional brush of their shoulders as they moved around the stacked boxes. Each movement, though mundane in purpose, carried weight because of the awareness between them. "I really appreciate your help," she said again, quieter this time, almost to herself. Her eyes met his, soft and searching, as if she were trying to gauge the sincerity of the feelings they both kept unspoken. He smiled, feeling a subtle warmth spread through his chest. "I enjoyed it," he admitted simply. "More than I thought I would." For a few moments, they stood there in the sunlight, the room filled with the quiet satisfaction of accomplishment and the lingering tension of connection. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic gesture, just a shared acknowledgement that something meaningful had passed between them. The physical task had ended, but the emotional resonance remained, a slow, steady hum that neither wanted to disrupt. By the time he prepared to leave, the unspoken understanding was clear. Their interaction had shifted from casual courtesy to a subtle, meaningful intimacy. They weren't yet lovers or even formally friends. They were two people who had noticed each other, supported each other, and, in the process, found a fragile but undeniable spark. The story of the boxes had become something else entirely. A quiet, tender bridge between two hearts, leaving both of them aware that this encounter would linger in memory long after the physical exertion had faded. Was complete. After the last box was settled and the room finally quieted, they found themselves lingering in the soft glow of the late afternoon sunlight. He sat on the edge of a low step, catching his breath, while she rested against the wall nearby, tucking her hair behind her ear and letting her gaze drift around the now orderly apartment. There was a stillness between them, not awkward but heavy with unspoken awareness. A moment that felt suspended in time, where ordinary gestures took on subtle electric significance. She finally spoke, her voice softer than before. "I can't remember the last time someone helped me like this, without rushing or judging." He looked at her, catching the faint vulnerability that peeked through the quiet confidence she usually carried. "I think everyone deserves that once in a while," he said, his tone sincere but careful, leaving space for her to respond without pressure. As they spoke, small, seemingly accidental touches continued to punctuate the moment. Her knee brushed his as she shifted on the step, his fingers lingering just near hers without intention. Each contact was fleeting yet meaningful, leaving them both acutely aware of the warmth and presence of the other. He noticed the softness of her sweater against his arm, the subtle scent of her perfume that lingered in the air, and the way her eyes seemed to hold questions she wasn't ready to voice. They shared stories in that quiet pause, moving from light-hearted anecdotes to deeper reflections, childhood memories, little regrets, the challenges they faced in their respective lives. He spoke of moments where he felt unsure of himself, and she listened intently, her expression gentle, her gaze steady. When she shared her own vulnerabilities, he noticed a fleeting hesitation in her voice, quickly masked by her composed exterior. Yet, beneath it, he felt the realness of her courage, the weight of her experiences, and the quiet strength that had drawn him in from the very first moment. There was a sense of rhythm in their conversation, an ebb and flow that didn't need words to be understood. Their eyes met often, lingering slightly longer than necessary, their smiles carrying unspoken recognition. The sunlight filtered through the window, painting the room in warm gold, highlighting the subtle contours of her face and the softness of her hair. He felt a flutter of awareness, a magnetic pull toward her presence, tempered by respect and the understanding that these feelings needed patience. For the first time, both felt the emotional impact of the day fully, the trust that had built in small increments, the delicate intimacy of shared effort and mutual observation. There was no rush to define the connection, no pressure to name what was growing between them. Instead, the silence and subtle touches spoke volumes. The gentle brush of her hand as she adjusted her hair, his shoulder nudging hers as he reached for a nearby object, the warmth of proximity that neither tried to escape. As the sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the floor, a quiet understanding settled over them. They weren't simply acquaintances who had moved boxes together. They were two people who had begun to see each other with clarity, appreciation, and curiosity. The emotional tension remained, simmering just beneath the surface, but it was comforting rather than urgent. It was a bond built on small gestures, attentive observation, and the realization that sometimes the quietest moments carry the deepest significance. In that soft, golden light, they lingered a little longer, aware that something remarkable had begun. Not a dramatic romance, not yet, but a slow, unfolding connection that promised more than either had expected, leaving both hearts quietly attentive, quietly hopeful, and quietly changed. The apartment, once a cluttered mess of cardboard and packing tape, now felt settled, alive, and calm. Boxes were stacked neatly, books lined the shelves, and the faint scent of freshly opened cartons mingled with the subtle fragrance she always wore. He stood near the doorway, a quiet observer of the space she had shaped with both care and effort, and felt a strange reluctance to leave. She approached him slowly, her movements deliberate yet relaxed. There was a softness in her expression, a quiet warmth that hadn't been there before, or at least had been hidden behind composure and effort. "I really don't know how to thank you," she said again, this time with an intimacy in her voice that made him pause. He smiled, brushing a hand across his hair nervously, and replied, "No thanks needed. I enjoyed it, being here." For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other. The room, filled with sunlight and shadows, felt suspended in time. He noticed the way her eyes softened when she smiled, the gentle curve of her lips, and the subtle glint of appreciation mixed with curiosity in her gaze. She, in turn, felt the calm steadiness of his presence, the sincerity in his expression, and the quiet, unspoken care that had threaded through every gesture of the day. Then came a small, unplanned gesture that carried more weight than words could. She reached out, lightly touching his forearm in a way that was casual yet intimate. The warmth of her hand lingered, a silent acknowledgement of connection, of gratitude, and perhaps of curiosity. He felt a subtle spark, brief but undeniable, and returned her touch with a gentle nod, letting the contact speak what neither needed to say aloud. The sunlight shifted, painting the room in warmer tones, and they both sensed that the moment was fragile and rare. There was no need for dramatics, no urgent declarations. This was the beauty of their connection. Quiet, respectful, and profoundly human. He took a small step toward the door, and she moved slightly closer, their shoulders brushing lightly. In that simple contact, there was a promise of attention, of care, of something tender that could be explored further in the days to come. Finally, he stepped toward the threshold, glancing back one last time. She met his gaze, her eyes reflecting a mixture of thoughtfulness and subtle hope. "See you soon?" she asked, the words light, but carrying the weight of unspoken possibility. He nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips, feeling both warmth and anticipation. "I'd like that," he replied. As he walked away, the apartment door closing softly behind him, neither of them felt emptiness. Instead, there was a lingering resonance, a quiet joy, a sense of connection, and the comforting thought that their paths had intersected in a meaningful way. For both, the day's events had become more than just moving boxes. They had discovered the gentle power of shared effort, the quiet thrill of attention, and the subtle, growing awareness of each other's presence. The story closed not with a dramatic declaration, but with a tender, lasting impression. Two hearts had brushed against one another in the soft light of ordinary moments, leaving both changed, aware, alive, and quietly hopeful. The future was open, uncertain, and full of promise. But in that instant, the connection was complete, meaningful, and unforgettable. If you felt the slow burn tension and warmth in their story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more heartwarming age gap romance stories you won't want to miss.